So, let's talk about promises. We make them all the time. But did you know that not every promise you make is a promise the law will actually make you keep? Today, we're going to dig into that invisible line, the one that separates a casual "I promise" from a legally binding contract. So, what is the real price of a promise?
I mean, think about it. We've all done it, right? Made a promise we couldn't keep. Maybe you promised to meet a friend for coffee or help someone move house. But could they have sued you for it? Probably not. But what if that promise was to sell your car for a specific price or to forgive a big debt? Suddenly the stakes feel a lot higher, and that's exactly where the law steps in, trying to figure out which promises are serious enough to enforce and which ones are, well, just talk.
And that brings us to the big, fundamental question that has honestly puzzled judges for centuries. Where exactly do we draw that line? Figuring out which promises the law should stand behind is pretty much the core problem that contract law was invented to solve. So, let's break it down. On one side, you have your everyday social promise. I promise I'll meet you for coffee. Sure, it's a moral thing. You should probably go, but it would be kind of crazy if your friend could sue you for bailing, right? But then on the other side, you've got a legal promise. I promise to pay you $500 for your phone. Now that sounds like an agreement the law might actually enforce. The key difference isn't always about how serious it feels. It's about whether the law sees it as a real deal or just, part of life. Okay, so how does the law actually tell these two apart? Well, in the common law system, that's the system in places like England, the US, Australia, they have this special tool. It's a legal doctrine, a test called consideration. And its whole job is to figure out if a promise is just a one-off statement or if it's part of a real bargain. So, consideration. What on earth is that? Put simply, it's the something for something. It's what you give in exchange for what you get. Think of it like the law asking, hey, was this just a one-sided gift or was this a two-way street? For a promise to be legally binding, both people involved have to put something of value on the table. It's all about the exchange. And this old legal quote, it absolutely nails it. It says an act or a promise is the price for which the promise of the other is bought. I love that framing. It's not just a promise, it's something that is bought. And that price, it could be cash, it could be doing something, or even just promising to do something else. That is the consideration. So the process itself looks pretty straightforward, right? You've got party A who makes a promise. Then you have party B who gives something back in return. That's the price we were just talking about. And boom, you've got the essential ingredients for a legally binding bargain. It all comes back to that mutual two-way exchange. But here's where it gets really interesting. A little bit weird even. That price, it doesn't have to be fair. It doesn't have to be equal. The courts have this famous rule where they say they won't look into the adequacy of consideration. Get this, in a real case, a single pound, just 1 pound, was considered enough to make a deal to buy land legally binding. So it's not about the amount of money or value, it's just about the existence of the bargain, even if it's totally symbolic. Okay, but this is where the whole thing gets, well, complicated. What happens when this simple, neat little rule of something for something leads to results that just feel unfair or plain wrong? Let's dive into some real-life legal puzzles where this rule really gets tested. All right, first up, the unenforceable gift. Picture this. A mother writes down multiple times that she promises to forgive her son's mortgage debt. Her intention is crystal clear, right? But the court said, nope, not binding. Why? Because the son didn't give her anything new in return for that promise. It was seen as a gift, not a bargain. So her very clear intention was totally defeated by this technicality. Or what about this one? The famous sailor's dilemma. A ship is in the middle of a dangerous voyage. Some of the crew desert. The captain, in a tough spot, promises the remaining sailors extra pay if they just get the ship home safely. So they do it, they pull through, but when they get back, the court refuses to enforce the captain's promise. And the reason? The sailors were already under contract to do all they could in an emergency. They didn't give any new consideration for that extra pay. And when you look at the timeline, you can see the court's cold, hard logic. The crew signed the contract. Then sailors deserted. The captain makes his promise of extra cash. The crew sails the ship home. But in the end, the court says the promise is unenforceable. Why? Because from the court's point of view, the sailors were just doing what they'd already agreed to do. They didn't buy that new promise with any fresh action. It's a harsh result, but that's how the rule worked. Now, to be fair, the courts have realized how tough this rule can be, so they've tried to adapt. They've come up with something called the practical benefit test.
It's a way to argue that maybe, just maybe, the captain did get a new benefit, like not having to find a new crew. But honestly, it often feels like a legal workaround, a patch on the broken system. They're still stuck trying to find a bargain instead of just asking the simple, more important question, was this a serious promise that everyone intended to be kept? So, if this whole bargain test is so clunky and causes all these problems, is there another way? Is there a better alternative? Well, yes. And to find it, we can actually look at a different legal system that decided to take a completely different path. And here it is. This is the absolute key difference. The common law is obsessed with one question: was there a bargain? It's all about the form of the deal. But the alternative approach, which you see in places like Scotland, asks a much simpler, more direct question. Did the person making the promise intend to be legally bound by it? See how that shifts everything? It moves the focus away from the technicalities of an exchange and onto the actual will of the person making the promise. And if you look at how it actually works in Scotland, it's pretty eye-opening. They just don't require consideration. If you make a promise, and you clearly intend for it to be legally binding, the law will generally enforce it. That promise to give a gift? It becomes binding if you just put it in writing. And promises made in a business context? Yeah, they're pretty much always seen as enforceable. The whole system works perfectly fine, all by focusing on what people actually intended. So all of this, it brings us right back to the central debate, the big question. What is contract law even for? What should it be trying to achieve? Is its job just to police bargains, or should it be about upholding the serious, deliberate promises that people make? You can really see the two sides of the argument here. The defenders of consideration say, hey, it's good evidence of intent. It makes people stop and think before they're legally bound. But the arguments against it are, you have to admit, pretty powerful. It can totally ignore someone's clear intention, like with the mom and her son. It can be a total fiction. I mean, come on, £1. And as we saw with those poor sailors, it can create results that just feel unfair and make the law look, well, messy. And, this is not a new fight. We're talking decades ago. A very senior judge, Lord Wright, put it perfectly. He basically said that consideration can't be the final test. At best, it's just evidence that someone might have wanted to make a contract. The real question, what he called the decisive and overriding question, should always be, did that person actually have a deliberate mind to contract? Which leaves us with this final big question to think about. In our modern world, with all its complex deals and personal commitments, what should the law care about more? The rigid technical form of a bargain, or the clear, deliberate substance of a promise? To put it simply, if you make a serious promise and you fully intend to be bound by it, shouldn't your word be enough?